The chandeliers dripped light, like frozen diamonds, casting a crystalline glow over the cavernous hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The scent of hothouse lilies and expensive perfume mingled with the metallic tang of ambition, a fragrance unique to nights like this. The Metropolitan Innovators Gala was the apex of New York's social and professional calendar, a confluence of old money, new tech, and timeless power. Conversations were a low hum of leveraged buyouts and philanthropic one-upmanship. A symphony of influence played under the watchful eyes of ancient statues. Elara Vance stood just off stage. The muted roar of the room, a distant pressure against her ears. Her gown, a column of midnight blue silk, was a statement of minimalist elegance, the architectural precision of its lines a reflection of her own mind. She felt the weight of 1,000 gazes, but her posture remained as unyielding as the steel skeletons she designed. Tonight was her coronation. The Visionary of the Year award was more than a trophy. It was a validation, a final, shimmering seal on a career she had built from nothing but grit and blueprints. She ran a hand over the cool fabric of her dress, the gesture smooth and controlled. She was Elara Vance, the self-made architectural engineer who had redefined the city's skyline with structures that were not just buildings, but arguments for a better future, sustainable, beautiful, and humane. She, the girl from a working-class neighborhood in Queens, whose father had been a small-time contractor with big dreams and a broken reputation, was about to be honored in the same hall where Rockefellers and Vanderbilts had once held court. And now, the host's voice boomed, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, to present the Visionary of the Year award, a man whose own vision has shaped so much of our great city, the chairman of Thorne Industries, Mr. Julian Thorne. A ripple of applause, deferential and strong, followed Julian as he strode to the podium. He was a man carved from granite and privilege, his Savile Row suit fitting him with the same comfortable authority as his family name. The Thornes were New York royalty, their real estate empire a sprawling octopus with tentacles in every borough. Julian, with his cool gray eyes and predator's smile, had not just inherited that empire. He had made it more powerful, more ruthless. Elara felt a subtle tightening in her chest. She and Julian moved in the same circles, but were from different worlds. He built for profit. She built for people. Their professional relationship was a dance of polite, icy cordiality, each aware of the other as a force to be reckoned with. "Thank you," Julian began, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that commanded silence. He scanned the audience, his gaze lingering for a moment on Elara. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate innovation, to honor a vision that pushes boundaries. And in that spirit, I've been asked to say a few words about our honoree, Elara Vance." He paused, letting the anticipation build. The house lights dimmed slightly, focusing a soft spotlight on Elara's face. She maintained a neutral, pleasant expression, the kind she'd perfected in boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. But before the official presentation, Julian continued, a subtle shift in his tone. "I'd like to offer a more personal tribute, an unscheduled one, if you'll indulge me." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not on the program. Julian Thorne was not a man given to spontaneous sentiment. Elara's internal alarms, honed by years of navigating treacherous professional waters, began to sound a low, steady warning. "You see," Julian said, his eyes locking onto hers, "the name Vance is not new to the world of New York construction. It has a history, a legacy." The word legacy was spoken with a strange, cutting emphasis. 15 years ago, a much smaller firm, Vance & Son Construction, was the primary contractor on a mid-rise residential project in the West Village. a project that ended in tragedy. The air in the room grew heavy, the festive atmosphere evaporating like mist. Alara's heart began to beat a slow, powerful drum against her ribs. No, not here. Not now. A structural collapse. Julian's voice was now cold and clear. A surgeon's scalpel dissecting a past she thought was long buried. A catastrophic failure of engineering and oversight that resulted in financial ruin for many, including my own family, who were the primary investors. But more than that, it resulted in the loss of life. He didn't need to be specific. The headlines from 15 years ago flashed in Alara's mind. West Village collapse, kills 3. Vance and son, blamed. Her father, David Vance, had been destroyed. Not by a legal verdict, the official investigation had been inconclusive, with blame diffused among multiple parties, but by the court of public opinion. A trial by media that had bankrupted him, broken his health, and ultimately led to his early death. That firm, Julian continued, his gaze sweeping the silent, captivated audience, was run by Alara Vance's father. A collective. Soft gasp rippled through the hall. The faces turned toward her were no longer admiring. They were curious, judgmental, hungry for the drama unfolding before them. This was no tribute. It was a public execution. Now, we are told to celebrate Ms. Vance's success, Julian said, his tone dripping with polished condescension. Her meteoric rise, the gleaming towers she has built. But I must ask myself, and I ask all of you, on what foundation is this success truly built? Is it one of genuine innovation? Or is it one built upon a legacy of corner-cutting ambition, of a moral bankruptcy that values speed over safety, profit over people? Every word was a perfectly calibrated blow, designed not to be a crude insult, but a sophisticated character assassination. He wasn't calling her a criminal. He was framing her as the inheritor of a poisoned legacy, her every achievement now tainted by association. He was planting a seed of doubt that would grow like a weed in the fertile ground of high society gossip. I do not question Ms. Vance's talent, Julian concluded, his voice softening into a mask of false sincerity. I merely question the ethics of an industry and an awards committee that would choose to celebrate a name so closely associated with such a profound and painful failure, a failure that some of us can never forget. He set the microphone back in its stand, his expression one of somber gravity, as if he had just performed a difficult but necessary public service. He turned his back to the podium and walked to his seat. The applause he received scattered, uncertain, and quickly dying. All eyes were on Alara. The host, flustered and pale, stammered into the microphone, trying to regain control. But no one was listening to him. They were watching her, waiting for her to crumble, to cry, to flee the stage in shame. But Alara Vance did none of those things. She stood perfectly still, her posture unchanged, her face, projected onto the massive screens flanking the stage, was a mask of glacial composure. Her eyes, clear and direct, did not waver. The only sign of the inferno raging within her was the subtle, rhythmic clenching of a single muscle in her jaw. Her stillness was more powerful than any outburst could have been. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane, a terrifying quiet that hinted at a deep, controlled rage and the violent reopening of a wound she had spent her entire adult life trying to scar over. She took a slow, deliberate breath, walked to the podium, and gently adjusted the microphone. The room was so quiet she could hear the faint hum of the electrical equipment. She looked out at the sea of powerful, influential faces staring back at her. And then her eyes found Julian Thorne, watching her with a look of cold triumph. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice even, steady, and dangerously calm, "for reminding us all that the strongest structures are often built on the most challenging foundations." She then turned to the awards committee representative holding her trophy and accepted it with a steady hand and a small, inscrutable smile. The hook had been set, not by Julian, but by her. He had started a war, believing he had already won. He had no idea he had just armed the most formidable opponent he would ever face. The silence in Alara's apartment was a physical presence. It was a minimalist sanctuary, 40 floors above the ceaseless energy of Manhattan. A space of clean lines, muted colors, and carefully curated emptiness. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of the city she had helped to build, its lights a glittering, indifferent tapestry. This apartment, like her life, was a fortress of control, designed to keep the chaos of the past at bay. But tonight, the walls felt thin, the silence accusatory. The Visionary of the Year award sat on her polished concrete countertop, its sharp, geometric lines mocking her. She stared at it, seeing not a symbol of her success, but a monument to her public humiliation. She could still feel the weight of those hundreds of gazes, the shift from admiration to suspicion. Julian Thorne had not just attacked her. He had retroactively poisoned every achievement, every late night over blueprints, every battle won in a male-dominated industry. He had taken her triumph and twisted it into a legacy of shame. Her father's face materialized in her memory, not as the strong, capable builder she had worshipped as a child, but as the shell of a man he had become after the collapse. David Vance had been a craftsman, an artist who worked in steel and concrete. He believed a building had a soul, a responsibility to the people it sheltered. The West Village project had been his masterpiece, the culmination of a lifetime of hard work. When it fell, it took him with it. He lost his business, his savings, and his will to live, wasting away from what the doctors called a heart condition, but what Alara knew was a terminal case of a broken spirit. He died 2 years after the incident, convinced he was a failure. Alara had dedicated her life to proving him wrong, to rebuilding the Vance name into something synonymous, not with failure, but with excellence and integrity. She'd worked twice as hard, been twice as smart, and held herself to a standard of perfection that bordered on obsession. And she had succeeded. Until tonight. Her phone buzzed, shattering the oppressive quiet. The caller ID read Marcus. Marcus Thorne, no relation to Julian, had been her father's best friend and her own steadfast mentor, a grizzled, brilliant structural engineer who had retired to a quiet life of consulting and woodworking. He was the one person who understood the full weight of the history Julian had so casually weaponized. She answered, her voice a little rougher than she intended. "Marcus." "I saw it," he said, his voice a low rumble of gravel and concern. No preamble, no pleasantries. "The whole disgusting performance is already all over the internet. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she replied. The lie automatic. It was her standard response, the shield she raised against any hint of pity. "Don't give me that. Alara, that man tried to gut you in front of the entire city. It was a calculated, vicious attack." She walked to the window, tracing the line of a new skyscraper she'd designed, its spire a needle of light against the inky sky. "It was effective," she admitted. "My phone has been buzzing with canceled meetings and concerned emails from clients. The damage is already done. This isn't just about business, and you know it. This is about David." Marcus said gently, "Julian Thorne is the son of Richard Thorne. The money behind that project. The Thornes lost a fortune. But they had a fortune to lose. Your father lost everything. I know who he is. Marcus. Her own research into the Thorne family had been meticulous over the years. Julian was a formidable figure, a man who moved markets with a single phone call. He was respected for his business acumen and feared for his ruthlessness. He had never shown any particular animosity toward her before tonight. Their interactions had been coolly professional. Why now? Why so publicly? There's something more to this, she said, thinking aloud. The collapse was 15 years ago. Thorne Industries is more powerful than ever. This wasn't about money. It was personal. The way he looked at me. It was pure hatred. The Thornes always believed your father was solely to blame. Marcus sighed. They pushed that narrative hard, used their lawyers and PR people to make sure David was the scapegoat. It was easier than admitting the project was rushed, that their own oversight was sloppy. Alara's mind, the same analytical mind that could visualize the stress points in a 50-story building, began to work. The problem was defined. The objective was clear. Julian Thorne had declared war, using her father's memory as his primary weapon. He assumed she would retreat, hide, and manage the damage. He had made a grave miscalculation. He wants to destroy the name Vance, she said, her voice hardening, the glacial composure from the gala returning. But this time, it was not a defense. It was a weapon being forged. He thinks he can bury me under the weight of the past. He's about to find out that I don't just build on foundations. I excavate them. What are you going to do? Marcus asked, a note of caution in his voice. Alara, be careful. Julian Thorne is not a man you cross lightly. He has armies of lawyers. Then I'll get my own. She stated simply, and I'm going to find out what really happened 15 years ago. Every memo, every inspection report, every single piece of correspondence. The official investigation was inconclusive. I'm going to conclude it. I'm going to find the truth. And I'm going to use it to restore my father's name. And what about Julian? Alara looked at her reflection in the dark glass, the city lights glittering behind her, like 1,000 watchful eyes. Her expression was calm. Her eyes narrowed with a purpose as cold and hard as diamond. Julian Thorne built his narrative on a lie. She said, I'm going to tear it down, piece by piece, and I'm going to do it in the one place he feels safest, the public eye. She ended the call and stood in the silence for a long moment. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a pure, crystalline resolve. For 15 years, she had run from the shadow of that collapsed building. Now, she would turn and face it. More than that, she would dismantle it, brick by painful brick, until she found the hairline fracture in its foundation, the truth that would bring the entire house of Thorne crashing down. The first calls came the next morning, as predictable as the sunrise. The Halcyon Tower project, a landmark commission that would have been the crown jewel of her portfolio, was being put on indefinite hold. The developer, a man who had lauded her genius just last week, was now citing concerns from our investors regarding potential reputational risk. It was a polite, corporate execution. The second call was from the board of a prestigious architectural review she sat on, suggesting she take a leave of absence to address these personal matters. By noon, 3 more clients had invoked obscure clauses in their contracts to pause their projects. Julian's character assassination had been brutally effective. He hadn't needed to prove anything. He had simply made the name Vance toxic. Alara absorbed each blow with the same outward calm she had displayed at the gala. Inside, a cold fury was meticulously cataloging every slight, every canceled contract, every condescending email. This was not just business. It was a systematic attempt to erase her, to professionally unperson her. Her first move was not to plead or reason with her fleeing clients. It was to hire the best legal mind she could find. Anya Sharma was a name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in New York's legal circles. She was a brilliant, relentless litigator who specialized in complex corporate warfare. Her office was a stark, white space in a midtown skyscraper that felt less like a law firm and more like a command center. Anya, a sharp woman in her 40s with intelligent, penetrating eyes, listened without interruption as Alara laid out the events of the gala and the subsequent professional fallout. She took no notes. Her focus, absolute. "This isn't a libel case, Ms. Vance," Anya said when Alara finished, her voice as precise as her appearance. Thorne was clever. He didn't make a single statement that is legally actionable as slander. He questioned, he alluded, he framed. It was a masterclass in reputation destruction, without leaving legal fingerprints. "I'm not here to sue him for libel," Alara responded, her tone firm. "I'm here because I need to launch a full investigation into the West Village collapse of 2009. I want every document, every deposition, every piece of physical evidence that still exists. I want to know the truth of why that building fell." Anya leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "That's a 15-year-old cold case. The official city and state investigations were concluded. Records will be sealed, archived, or lost. Witnesses will have moved, forgotten, or been paid to forget. Thorne Industries will fight you at every turn with unlimited resources. This will be astronomically expensive, and the chances of uncovering a smoking gun are slim to none." "I have the capital," Alara said, unflinching, "and I am not looking for a smoking gun. I'm an engineer. I'm looking for the point of failure. There's always one." Anya studied Alara for a long moment, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. "This is personal for you." "It is," Alara confirmed. "Julian Thorne made it so. He used my father's tragedy to try and end my career. He is about to discover what a profound misjudgment that was." "Very well," Anya said, a slight smile touching her lips. "I'll have my team start filing discovery motions and Freedom of Information requests. We'll start with the city's Department of Buildings archives. But I warn you, the first wall you'll hit will be made of paper, and it will be 10 feet high." Anya was right. The initial search was a lesson in bureaucratic frustration. The official report on the collapse was over 1,000 pages long, a dense and technical document that concluded with the maddeningly vague finding of multiple contributing factors, citing faulty concrete mixtures from one subcontractor, questionable welding from another, and potential design flaws in the initial plans that had been approved by the city. It spread the blame so thinly that no single party was culpable enough for criminal charges. The supporting documents, the daily inspection logs, the subcontractor correspondence, the materials testing results were even more difficult to access. Many were sealed under a court order from the civil suits that followed the collapse. Others were simply missing from the city archives, attributed to a records transfer error a decade ago. "This isn't an error. It's a firewall," Alara said to Anya during a late-night strategy session, surrounded by stacks of heavily redacted documents in her apartment. Someone with a great deal of influence made sure this trail went cold. "Thorne Industries," Anya stated, pointing to a legal document. They were the lead petitioner on the motion to seal the records from the civil cases, citing proprietary business information. They built the wall you're running into. While Anya's legal team chipped away at the paper fortress, Julian continued his offensive. An anonymous source leaked a story to a prominent real estate blog, rehashing the old accusations against Alara's father, this time with added, unsubstantiated claims of him being in financial trouble before the collapse, implying a motive for cutting corners. Ilara was professionally isolated, a pariah in the industry she had so recently dominated. Her only refuge was her work with Marcus. Together, they spent hours poring over the few technical documents they could obtain, recreating the building's design on Ilara's advanced computer modeling software. The design itself was sound. Marcus grumbled one evening, pointing at a 3D rendering of the building's steel skeleton. Your father's plans were solid. Aggressive, maybe. But within code, the failure point wasn't on the paper. It was in the material, or the execution. We need the daily logs. Marcus, the materials reports. Ilara insisted, her frustration mounting. We need to know who was on site, who signed off on what, and when. The lead engineer for the Thorn Group's oversight team was a man named Robert Chen, Marcus said, pulling a name from the depths of his memory. Good man, meticulous. He and your father respected each other, even when they argued over specifications. Chen left the industry right after the collapse, said he was retiring. He was only in his early 50s. I always found that strange. The name was a key, a potential door in the wall. Robert Chen. He hadn't been mentioned in any of the public reports Ilara had seen. He was a ghost. Where is he now? Ilara asked, her focus sharpening. Last I heard, he'd moved somewhere quiet, upstate. Maybe he fell off the map. Finding Robert Chen became their new priority. Anya's investigators, skilled at finding people who didn't want to be found, started their search. Meanwhile, Ilara and Anya decided to dig deeper into the Thorn family itself, looking for any leverage, any weakness. They spent weeks combing through public records, financial statements, and old society pages, building a comprehensive profile of Julian Thorn. It was in a dusty online archive of a local Westchester newspaper that they found it. An obituary from 15 years ago, for a 16-year-old girl named Lily Thorn. The date of death was the same as the West Village building collapse. The obituary mentioned she was the beloved daughter of Richard Thorn and the cherished younger sister of Julian Thorn. It described her as a vibrant, artistic girl who loved painting and had a particular fondness for lilies, a detail that made the memory of the gala's floral arrangements suddenly sickening. Ilara stared at the pixelated, smiling face of the young girl on the screen. The entire conflict snapped into a horrifyingly clear new focus. Anya, Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper. Julian's sister. She was one of the victims. The official reports had listed the 3 fatalities, but their names had been withheld from the press at the family's request to protect their privacy. Lily Thorn had been visiting the site that day. Her father, Richard, had brought her along to see the progress on the building. A sweet father-daughter outing that had turned into an unspeakable tragedy. Julian Thorn's vendetta was not about money or social standing or corporate rivalry. It was about grief. It was about a brother who had lost his sister and had spent 15 years nursing a cold, hard stone of hatred in his heart. A hatred he had aimed squarely at the most convenient target, her father. And now, her. This changed everything. This wasn't a business dispute anymore. It was a blood feud. And Ilara realized, with a chilling certainty, that Julian Thorn would never stop. Not until he had taken from her everything she had. Just as he believed her father had taken everything from him. Armed with the knowledge of Julian's true motivation, Ilara decided a direct confrontation was necessary. It was a high-risk maneuver, but she needed to see him, to gauge the depth of his conviction, and to let him know she would not be a passive victim in his quest for vengeance. She arranged a meeting through their lawyers, under the pretext of discussing a potential settlement, to avoid further public conflict, a pretext she knew he would see right through. His office was on the top floor of the Thorn Tower, a monument of black glass and steel that dominated the Midtown skyline. The space was as cold and imposing as the man himself. A vast expanse of Italian marble, minimalist furniture, and a panoramic view of the city that seemed less a vista and more a conquered territory. Julian sat behind a desk the size of a small car, not rising when she entered. He gestured to the chair opposite him, the movement economical and dismissive. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I confess I'm surprised you requested this meeting. I thought my position was made rather clear." "Your position is based on a false narrative," Alara began, keeping her own voice level and calm. "One that you have cultivated for 15 years. "The narrative," Julian countered, leaning forward slightly, "is based on facts. A building failed. People died. Your father's company was the contractor. These are immutable truths." "My father was a scapegoat," Alara stated, her gaze unwavering. "And I have reason to believe you know that. I've been reviewing the case files. I know about your sister, Lily. I am truly sorry for your loss." For the first time, a flicker of raw emotion crossed Julian's face, a brief, sharp intake of breath, a tightening around his eyes. He had not expected her to know. The mention of his sister's name was a violation of the sanctum of his grief. "Do not," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Speak her name." "Her death was a tragedy." Alara pressed on, refusing to be intimidated. "But blaming my father for it is an injustice. He was a good man who was ruined by lies." "A good man." Julian's laugh was a sharp, ugly sound. "Your father was a charlatan who built his career on cutting corners. He was in debt, desperate to finish the project on time and under budget. My father trusted him. My sister was there that day because she was proud of what our family was building. Your father's ambition put her in that building when it collapsed. He killed her as surely as if he had pushed her from the roof." The conviction in his voice was absolute. He believed it. He had spent half his life cementing this version of the truth in his mind, a truth that gave his pain a target. "You're wrong," Alara said quietly, "and I'm going to prove it." A cold smile touched Julian's lips. "You are going to do nothing. You are a ghost. Your career is over. I have made sure of that. But it seems you require a more definitive lesson." He picked up his phone and pressed a button. "Send them in." The door opened, and a man in a crisp suit entered and handed Alara a thick legal folio. "What is this?" she asked, though a sense of dread was already pooling in her stomach. "That," Julian said, his eyes gleaming with cold triumph, "is a lawsuit for defamation, emotional distress, and professional negligence causing wrongful death. I am suing you, personally, and your firm, for the death of my sister. We are seeking damages of $200 million. Alara stared at the documents, the dense legal text swimming before her eyes. It was a frivolous, reputation-destroying lawsuit, a legal atomic bomb designed not to be won, but to bankrupt her, to bleed her dry in legal fees, to drag her family's name through the mud one last time. It was his checkmate. "You will spend the rest of your life, and whatever is left of your father's tattered reputation, fighting this," Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You will sell your apartment, your assets, everything you have ever built, just to pay the lawyers, and when you have nothing left, I will take that too. You wanted to excavate the foundation. Ms. Vance, be careful what you find. You might just get buried in it." He stood then, a silent dismissal. The midpoint had been reached. He had revealed his pain. And then he had used it to escalate the war to a level she had not anticipated. She walked out of his office, the heavy folio in her hand, not defeated, but with a terrifying new clarity. He had left her with no exit, no possibility of retreat. He had left her with only one path forward: total victory, or total annihilation. The lawsuit was a declaration of war on all fronts. Julian's legal machine, a behemoth of a corporate law firm, moved with brutal efficiency. They filed motions, injunctions, and discovery requests designed to overwhelm and exhaust. Anya Sharma's small, agile team was forced onto the defensive, battling a relentless siege of paperwork and legal maneuvering. The media, fed by Julian's PR team, had a new, sensational narrative to feast upon. Thorne magnate sues architect in sister's cold case death. Her face was plastered across news sites, her carefully constructed professional identity replaced by the caricature of a villainess, the cold-hearted daughter of a negligent builder. The financial pressure was immense. Legal fees mounted at an alarming rate to fund her defense and Anya's ongoing investigation. Alara began the painful process of liquidating her life. She sold her portfolio of stocks and bonds first. Then went her collection of modern art. Finally, with a heavy heart, she put her apartment, her sanctuary, her fortress on the market. Moving into a small, functional rental felt like a strategic retreat, a shedding of armor to become a more mobile fighter. Her resolve, however, did not waver. It hardened. Julian's all-out assault had stripped away everything but her core purpose. She worked alongside Anya, often sleeping for only a few hours on a cot in the law office, fueled by coffee and a cold, steady rage. The pressure was immense, a constant, crushing weight that tested the limits of her endurance. There were moments of despair in the dead of night, when the scale of the fight seemed insurmountable. In those moments, Marcus was her anchor. "He wants you to break," he told her during one late-night call, his voice a comforting ballast against the storm. "He's using his money and power to grind you down because he knows he can't beat you on the facts. Don't let him." The breakthrough they desperately needed came from an unexpected source: Anya's investigator, a persistent ex-cop named Sal, finally located Robert Chen, the lead oversight engineer. He was living in a small, remote cabin in the Adirondacks, deliberately off the grid. Getting him to talk would be another matter entirely. Alara decided to go herself. She drove for 6 hours, the city receding in her rearview mirror, replaced by the dense, silent forests of upstate New York. She found Chen chopping wood outside his cabin, a man who looked older than his 60-odd years, his face etched with a deep, weary sadness. He was wary at first, refusing to speak about the past. "That's over," he said, his voice raspy. "I left that life behind for a reason." "A girl died," Alara said gently, not accusingly. "Lily Thorne. A building full of people could have died. My father died believing he was responsible. If you know something, you have a moral obligation to speak." She saw a flicker of conflict in his eyes. She stayed for 2 days, not pressuring him, but simply being present, sharing coffee on his porch, talking about her father, about his love for building, for doing things the right way. She spoke of her own belief that the truth, no matter how buried, eventually finds its way to the light. On the morning of the 3rd day, as she was preparing to leave, defeated, Chen finally broke his silence. "It was the steel," he said, his voice heavy with a 15-year-old burden. "The support beams for the 5th and 6th floors. They were substandard. They came from a new supplier Thorne's people insisted on using to cut costs. "Did you report it?" Alara asked, her heart pounding. Chen nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I flagged it, wrote up a report, sent it straight to Richard Thorne. He called me into his office. Julian was there, just a young man then, watching, learning from his father." He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Richard told me the project was already behind schedule and over budget. He said the steel was within acceptable variance, and that I should sign off on it. He told me my career, my family's future, depended on being a team player." "And you did?" "No," Chen said, a spark of his old integrity flashing in his eyes. "I refused. I told him I wouldn't put my name on something I knew was unsafe. The next day, I was removed from the project. They brought in another engineer to sign off. After the collapse, Richard Thorne's lawyers came to me. They offered me a generous severance package in exchange for my silence, and a prepared statement, an engineer's report." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. "What kind of report?" "One that laid the blame on contractor execution errors," Chen confessed, his voice thick with shame. "Specifically on Vance & Sons' team. They had me analyze the plans after the fact and find fault. They even had a forgery expert replicate your father's signature on a faked daily log, admitting he'd used a fast-curing concrete against my original and now missing recommendation. Here it was, the truth. Not a single point of failure, but a conspiracy, a deliberate cover-up orchestrated by Richard Thorne to protect his investment and his reputation. A sin his son Julian had inherited and was now defending with a scorched earth campaign. "They threatened me, Ms. Vance," Chen said, looking at her directly for the first time. "They made it clear that if I ever spoke of this, they would destroy me, just as they were destroying your father." "Will you testify?" Alara asked, her voice quiet but intense. "Will you sign a sworn affidavit?" Robert Chen looked at the calloused hands that had once signed off on blueprints for skyscrapers, hands he now used for chopping wood and tending a small garden. He looked at the peaceful wilderness around him, a life he had chosen as a form of penance. And he looked at the daughter of the man he had wronged, a woman who was fighting for the truth with a courage he had lacked. "Yes," he said, the word a release, a cracking of the dam of guilt he had carried for 15 years. "It's time." The day of the Thorne Industries annual shareholder meeting dawned gray and stormy. Rain lashed against the glass walls of the skyscraper where the event was being held. The sky a churning cauldron of bruised purple clouds. It was the perfect atmospheric backdrop for the drama Alara was about to unleash. This was her chosen battlefield, not a courtroom, where truth could be buried under mountains of legal procedure, but a public forum, in front of Julian's investors, his board of directors, and the live media, using the last of her liquid assets. She had, through a series of anonymous acquisitions, purchased a minority stake in Thorne Industries, just enough to grant her the right to speak at the meeting. It was an audacious, all-or-nothing gamble. She walked into the grand, intimidating auditorium, a lone figure in a dark, impeccably tailored suit. The room was packed with the titans of finance and industry, their collective net worth enough to rival the GDP of a small country. The air hummed with power. She saw Julian at the head table on the stage, looking confident, regal, completely in his element. He gave her a brief, dismissive nod, a silent acknowledgement of her presence. But his eyes held a flicker of curiosity. He couldn't imagine what she hoped to accomplish here. When the time came for shareholder comments, she walked calmly to the microphone in the aisle. A camera turned to her, her face appearing on the huge screens on either side of the stage. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. amplified throughout the silent hall. "My name is Alara Vance." A murmur went through the crowd. The name was infamous now. Julian's expression hardened, his posture stiffening. "Most of you know my name in connection with a lawsuit filed by your chairman, Mr. Thorne," she continued. "A lawsuit that seeks to blame my late father for the West Village building collapse 15 years ago. Mr. Thorne has built a compelling narrative of my family's culpability. Today, I am here to present a different narrative, one based not on speculation, but on evidence." She gestured to the main screen. "If you'll direct your attention." On the screen appeared a purchase order, dated 2 months before the collapse. It was from Thorne Industries to a steel supplier known for its low cost, low-quality materials. It was followed by a series of internal Thorne Industries emails, obtained through Anya's relentless discovery motions, discussing the need to manage costs and accelerate the timeline on the West Village project. Thorne Industries, under the direction of Julian's father, Richard Thorne, knowingly used substandard steel in the construction of the 5th and 6th floors. Alara announced, her voice ringing with conviction. Julian was on his feet now. "This is outrageous. These are baseless accusations. This is a forum for business, not for personal vendettas." "I am getting to the business, Mr. Thorne," Alara said coolly, "because this isn't just about the past. This is about a pattern of behavior, a corporate culture that prioritizes profit above all else." The next slide showed geological survey results for a new Thorne luxury development currently under construction in Miami, a project Julian himself was spearheading. She then displayed a second, different survey, one she had commissioned privately. The official geological report submitted for the Miami project minimizes the risks of soil liquefaction and subsidence. However, an independent analysis shows a much higher risk, one that would require a far more expensive foundation, cutting deep into your profit margins, a fact that seems to have been conveniently omitted from your investor prospectus. The board members shifted uneasily. This was hitting them where they lived their bottom line and their legal exposure. "This is a lie," Julian thundered, his face flushed with rage. "She is manipulating data to slander this company." "Am I?" Alara countered. "Or is this the same pattern of behavior that led to the West Village collapse? A willingness to cut corners, to ignore warnings, to hide the truth to protect profits?" Julian, seeing he was losing control of the room, played his final, devastating card. "She talks about truth," he said, his voice regaining its composure as he moved to the podium. "Let's talk about the truth. The truth is in the official record." On the screen flashed a scanned document, an engineer's report from the original incident. It detailed contractor errors, shoddy workmanship, and a critical failure to follow procedure. It seemed to prove every accusation he had ever made against her father. And at the bottom was a signature. Clear as day, David Vance. For a moment, the air left the room. It was a checkmate, a signed confession. Alara's entire case, her entire crusade, seemed to crumble into dust. The board members looked relieved. The investors settled back in their chairs. Julian looked at Alara with an expression of pure, venomous triumph. Alara remained perfectly still at the microphone. The storm outside broke, and rain hammered against the glass, a frantic, percussive sound. "That report," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "is a forgery. The signature is a forgery, and I can prove it." She looked toward the back of the auditorium. The doors opened. Robert Chen walked slowly down the aisle, his face pale but his expression resolute. "This is Robert Chen," Alara announced as he came to stand beside her. He was the lead oversight engineer for Thorn Industries on the West Village project. He was fired for refusing to approve the substandard steel. After the collapse, he was coerced by Richard Thorn into helping create the very document you see on that screen. Julian stared at Chen, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. This was a ghost from a past he thought was securely buried. "And Mr. Chen," Alara said, delivering the final blow, "has provided a sworn affidavit detailing the entire cover-up. An affidavit that includes a recorded conversation he had with Richard Thorn's lawyers. A conversation where they explicitly lay out their plan to scapegoat my father and forge his signature." She held up her phone, and a voice filled the auditorium, a tinny, 15-year-old recording of a lawyer instructing Chen on how to frame David Vance. It was irrefutable. It was the truth, unearthed and undeniable. The room erupted. The flashes of cameras were like lightning strikes. The board members stared at Julian, their faces a mixture of horror and betrayal. He stood alone on the stage, exposed, his family's generational corruption laid bare for the entire world to see. He had built his life, his identity, on a lie meant to protect his father and give his own grief a convenient target. And now, that lie had been publicly, spectacularly, and irrevocably demolished. Alara had not just cleared her father's name. She had stripped Julian Thorn of the one thing he valued more than money: his reputation. The foundation of his entire world had just collapsed. The fallout was swift and brutal. Before the shareholder meeting had even officially concluded, the board of Thorn Industries had moved into emergency session. Julian was forced to resign as chairman and CEO, effective immediately, by the end of the day. The U.S. Attorney's Office and the SEC had launched formal inquiries into Thorn Industries, citing evidence of securities fraud, conspiracy, and a 15-year-old cover-up. The company's stock plummeted, wiping out billions in market value overnight. The media landscape, which had so eagerly vilified Alara, reversed course with breathtaking speed. She was no longer the villainess. She was a heroine, a whistleblower, a David who had slain a corporate Goliath. Her face was on the cover of magazines, not as a subject of scandal, but as a symbol of integrity and resilience. Interview requests poured in from every major network. She accepted only one, giving a calm, factual account of her ordeal, consistently steering the narrative away from personal revenge and toward the need for greater accountability and ethical responsibility in her industry. A broken Julian, facing potential criminal charges and the complete ruin of his family's legacy, had no fight left in him. Through his lawyers, he agreed to a massive out-of-court settlement for the lawsuit he had initiated. The sum was staggering, more than enough to restore Alara's financial security tenfold. Anya Sharma urged her to press her advantage, to pursue personal charges against Julian, to destroy him completely. "He deserves it, Alara," Anya argued in her office, the victory still fresh. "He tried to annihilate you." "And what would that accomplish?" Alara asked, looking out the window at the city skyline. "Another life ruined by this tragedy. My father wouldn't have wanted that. This was about restoring his name, not destroying another one." She had a different plan for the money and the influence she now wielded. She chose not to pursue personal vengeance. Vengeance felt like an ending, a closing of a circle. She was interested in building something new. Months later, under a clear, crisp autumn sky, Alara stood on a different kind of stage. It was a simple wooden platform set up in a newly created park in the West Village. Behind her stood a beautiful, state-of-the-art community center, its design a testament to light, strength, and transparency. It was built on the exact lot where the building had collapsed 15 years prior, a piece of land that had sat empty and haunted for over a decade. This was the inaugural project of the Vance Thorne Foundation for Ethical Engineering. Using the settlement money, Alara had established a foundation dedicated to promoting safety, ethics, and innovation in construction. A foundation whose name served as a permanent public acknowledgement of a shared, painful history. She looked out at the crowd. Marcus was in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. Robert Chen was there, looking like a man who had finally found peace. Even some of her old clients, the ones who had abandoned her, had come to witness her final, definitive act of rebuilding. 15 years ago, on this very ground, a tragedy occurred, she began, her voice carrying over the quiet crowd. It was a tragedy born of haste, of compromised principles, and of a failure to remember that the structures we build are not just investments. They are the homes, the workplaces, the shelters for human lives. Today, we are not here to dwell on the failures of the past. We are here to dedicate ourselves to a better future. Her speech was not about victory or vindication. It was about responsibility. It was about learning from loss. It was about using her power not to tear down, but to build up. She had taken the ugliest chapter of her life and transformed it into a legacy of healing, for herself, for her father's memory, and for the city. This was her true victory, a form of justice more profound and lasting than any courtroom verdict. As the ceremony concluded, and people began to tour the new center, a young assistant handed her a small, plain envelope. There was no return address. Her name was typed on the front. She opened it. Inside was a single white card, and on it, 2 words, neatly typed. "Thank you." There was no signature, but she knew instantly who it was from. The words were not an apology, not an admission of guilt in the way the world demanded. They were something more complex, more personal. It was an acknowledgement, a release, a recognition, perhaps, that in freeing her father's name from the lie, she had also, in a strange and unexpected way, freed Julian from the prison of his own hate-filled grief. It was the beginning of his own path toward accepting a truth far more painful than the one he had invented. Alara folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. She looked up at the community center, its glass facade reflecting the bright, hopeful sky. She had not only restored her foundation, she had built a new one, stronger and more meaningful than any she had ever designed before.